In a world filled with chaos and a myriad of risks, there is opportunity. You're listening to Riding the Wave, Project Management for Emergency Managers, where we discuss how we adapt and rise above those rolling waves of hazards and threats we face, and rise to the top. And now, your host, the president of Pinnacle Performance Management, Andrew Boyarsky.
I have as my guest Todd DeVoe. He's the host of the Emergency Management Network podcast. He's also an adjunct professor of emergency management at the University of California in Irvine. And he's a contributing author of the book Campus Crisis Management, a comprehensive guide for practitioners. And he's also a national speaker on the topics of emergency management, crisis management, and business continuity. Todd, I want to thank you very much for coming on our podcast.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
And I want you're actually inaugurating a new season and a renewal of the podcast. It's been dormant for about 2 years. You know, so it went dormant during COVID. You know, it's been socially distancing, so to speak, during this period, and now it's I guess it's coming back as COVID's coming back in some ways. So.
Yeah, you follow the coattails of COVID for sure. Yeah, I can't believe it's been 2 years since we did this, because been on the show before, and of course you've been on my show, and I always find our conversations very interesting, and we could probably talk for hours. And I know that we have to limit this for the guests probably get bored on that, but we do have great conversations for sure.
Well, we could always make it a 2-part or a 3-part podcast if we get into enough subjects. So I'll kick things off because I read your article on the 30-60 day principle of disaster recovery that you posted, on the IAEM network, and I do really recommend to people to go and to read that. And for folks who are listening or watching this podcast, I will include a link to these articles, and I really do recommend going and getting a little bit more information. So in that article, you cite Nicholas Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. Can you explain to our listeners what Anti-Fragile is in a nutshell and how this applies in post-disaster recovery?
Yeah, and I want to go a little depth on this on the concepts of anti-fragility and Nicholas Taleb, how he got there. So everybody, well, I should say everybody, the majority of you out there are probably familiar with the concept of the black swan, and what that really truly means. And you understand that Taleb he's a quant, even though he doesn't admit it. He looks at things very uniquely in the sense of patterns of data, right? And so his argument is that black swan events aren't necessarily black swan events. That if you look at data enough, you can time them out. And the guy made his money, or makes his money still, I guess, on looking at financial black swans, if you will, finding them and betting on them. And so, like I say, betting on them, that's the wrong term. It's not like he's doing anything illegally. He's using it through investments and stuff like this. So it's really an investment strategy, if you will, that he talks about. And so we've taken the concept of an investment strategy of these turbulent times or whatnot with the black swan, and we've really moved them into the ideas of emergency management and what that means. And that goes back into Luker's work on the gray rhino, right? And so, the concept of was COVID a black swan or a gray rhino, right? And I think that's a wonderful debate to have, by the way. And I would say anybody in emergency management or public health knew that COVID, or at least a concept of sorts of flu-ish type event, was definitely a gray rhino. Like, we knew it was there. Whether it was going to charge at us when it charged, we couldn't guess that. But the idea here is that we had pandemic flu plans. Every everybody had a pandemic flu plan, and we got close a few times, right? SARS, MARS, the swine flu, all these other smaller, not pandemics, but
epidemics or outbreaks.
yeah, I mean they're damn close to pandemic, right? Like we thought about pulling the trigger a few times, but we didn't. So yeah, so that was more of a gray rhino event, and that's why the reason why I bring this up is because now you take a look at the writings that he did on anti-fragile, and the concept of anti-fragility is again, he's looking at economics, but we can take those and parlay them into disaster planning and emergency management, right? Is he's saying, like, look, if we put all of our financial eggs in one basket, say for instance, if you are, and he uses this example, and I'm going to kind of butcher it a little bit, but he uses the example of a doctor versus a cab driver, right? And he says that in an economic turndown, if a doctor loses his or her job, they're done, right? Like that's all their financial money is in one basket. Whereas a cab driver has the ability to make money in different ways, right? Whether it's through Uber, whether it's through cab driving, whether it's so they're able to go back. So he's saying that somebody like a cab driver is a little bit more financially anti-fragile, and in fact, when times are bad, sometimes those people with the cab driving job and is a somebody who can actually weather that storm more than, say, a CEO or CPA or something like that who has like this. So that's the concept, right? So how do we parlay that into emergency management? Well, we look at communities and we see how do we make them disaster resilient, right? And that's the first step into the concept of anti-fragility. And I wrote a piece on DRR as well, and how we should really embrace that as emergency management professionals here in the United States. We're worldwide, right? And I know the UN has done a lot of work on DRR. They have 17 principles. I don't necessarily agree with all 17 of them. I think some of them do not have a place in disaster response or recovery, but it's the worldwide thing, so everybody has a say. But the concept here is, how do we make each section of our community resilient to disasters, right? And so the concept of anti-fragility, again, he comes in this is saying that robustness, resiliency, those terms aren't strong enough, and some of them are squishy, right? And I spoke about this concept of squishiness with the word resilient, and even like there's a beer company that uses resilient, there's a makeup company called Resilient, there's these things like resilient makeup. Like, what's that mean, right? So what does resilient mean into you could mean something different to somebody else, right? But when we take a look at anti-fragile, which is a stronger word, meaning that you get stronger after a disaster, or the disaster makes your community stronger, right? And so that's the concept, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that that we can go into later, but that's the basics of what we mean when we're looking at Taleb's concept of anti-fragility and applying that to emergency management and disaster readiness.
So a couple things I wanted to just make sure our listeners who have heard some terms that may be familiar to most, but just want to make sure we clarify them, and that's the terms of a black swan and then that of the gray rhino. Because I just, again, for listeners who may know some of my podcast history, did have a show that had the black elephant imagery to it. The black elephant clearly is a cousin of the gray rhino. So I'll ask that question if you could just answer that, those two terms.
Sure. So the black swan event in England back in the 1800s or maybe before, I forget the exact timeline on it. Somebody said, "Oh, there's a black swan," and that's impossible. There's no such thing as a black swan. It never exists. And then when English, explorers and ended up going to Australia, well, lo and behold, they found black swans, and they were like, "Oh, this does exist. It's a thing." And so that became an analogy to something that you would say never existed, but somewhere out there it does, and it's going to surprise you. And that's what a black swan event is. It's something that, it's a one-off, it should never happen, and then lo and behold, it occurs. I tend to believe that most things are the gray rhino, and the gray rhino is something that is there. We're aware of it, and if you know anything about rhinoceroses or rhino, no, I think that's wrong. Is it rhinoceroses? Is that the multiple, or is it just rhino? Might be just rhino.
I think rhino is sort of the shorthand. Rhinos,
deer, whatever. Right. So no, if you know anything about rhinos, right, is that they're blind, not blind, but they don't have, they're nearsighted, farsighted. They can't see far. So they have like a very small circle to where that they protect, and they're very protective of that small circle, right? So you could be driving unbeknownst to yourself through a rhino's protected area, and they're going to charge you. And you've seen probably videos out there of like the gray rhinos charging into a caravan of vehicles and stuff like this, because they'll just run into whatever they feel is a threat, right? And so that's the idea. So when are you being charged by the gray rhino? Now they may be docile and sitting over, 200 yards away from you, but if you make that 150, if you get within the 150 yard range, they're going to charge at you. That's the concept behind it. And so instead of black swans, we see these threats down the road, right? And we're hoping that they stay down the road, but we recognize that they're there. And then what do you do to plan for those events? And so my argument again is that COVID, right, or at least some sort of pan flu event or pandemic cold, if you will, was out there, was going to hit. I'll tell you an interesting story. So I was talking to an epidemiologist. I interviewed him for my old podcast, and it was in October of 2019, early October. And so I asked the question a lot of times of what keeps you up at night. And he said, a respiratory disease coming from Asia. He didn't say China. He just said some Asia. And that's what he does. He's an epidemiologist. And so that's what kept him up at night. And, this is October of 2019. And obviously we know November of 2019, Wuhan occurred. And then, the rest is history. So again, not a shock to that particular epidemiologist. That wasn't something that he went, oh yeah, oh wow, this is scary, this is crazy. No, yep, this is what we're looking at. So that's what we're. So, and I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but I want to kind of push us through that. Our black swan events, our gray rhino events that we're looking at now, here, and we'll look at California. Would you have ever thought that a hurricane would hit California? 99% of the people would probably say no. Mm-hmm. Those of us in emergency management go, absolutely, it's happened before. Mm-hmm. Right? Now it's been a long time, but it has happened before. So it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
In the early spring, California had something like 21, I could be off of the number, don't quote me on it. It's around that, might be more, might be a little bit less, but somewhere around the 20 or 21 tornadoes. Now they're not F5s, they were the, F1 or 2, did some damage, hurt some people, but we had tornadoes in Southern California. If you ask the majority of people, does California have tornadoes? They would probably tell you no, right? So you go, oh, that's a black swan event. No. We know there's a history of tornadoes, just there's not a lot of them, right? So for emergency managers, we need to be living in that world of the gray rhino, of looking, understand what all threats are, and then planning for those threats. That's an all hazard approach, right? But with a little bit more understanding of the impact of those disasters.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. And so on that note of anti-fragility, how did the recovery in Paradise, California, after what's called the Camp Fire in 2018 exemplify the recovery framework that you wrote about in the sort of 30, 60, 90 day principle of recovery?
So with the 30, 60, 90 day principle of recovery is what you're looking at here. And the time frame is just, it's a time frame that we put on. It doesn't mean it's going to happen within 30, 60, 90 days. It's saying, what are the most important things that you have to talk about in those first 30 days? And then once you've got through those, what are the next step would be the 60 days. What are the most important things that are in front of you in those 60 days? And then into the 90 is a more long-term, right? 90 plus days. So that's really what that means. when we think about triage in medical, the first thing we talk about is start where you stand, right? You cannot, if you walk into a room with an overwhelming number of victims or to a scene with an overwhelming number of victims, you can't treat them all at the one time. But you can start right where you stand and start treating that person, triaging them, giving them a level, and then moving on. And then very quickly, you can have a room of 100 people triage, knowing what you're doing, which is the French word for sort, right? Because we have to be fancy that way, right? So we go through and we sort what our most important things are down to what can wait, down to, well, we'll get to what we can get to, right? Type of situations. So for instance, obviously the most important thing is life safety, right? And then when we get to it'd be like rebuilding the park, right? That just to kind of give you an idea of the balance of importance. Yes, we want to rebuild that park, but it is not important as rebuilding somebody's home. You know what I mean? So that's that concept behind it. So with Paradise, there's a couple of things associated with it, which I think is really critical. Sorry about that. With Paradise, there's a few things that are critical. Well, one is that the population obviously was reduced, and we've seen this happen time and time again across disasters, right? New Orleans, for instance, they originally had a 50% loss in the population. Now we're still at a 20% loss in the original population from when that storm hit, and that was in 2005. All right, so we're looking at the same type of numbers as far as percentage-wise of loss of population to Paradise. What does that mean? That means people are unwilling or afraid to move back to that area, or maybe they passed away. Either whether due to the fire or due to things afterwards, financially can't get back there. There's variables why that occurs. Then, so it's really important to understand this reduction of population, but the population that comes back, what do we do to make them anti-fragile, right? So working with building codes, working with construction materials, keeping areas clear, I should say, around the home, those important things become critical to that rebuilding, which means that if a fire comes through again, which the likelihood of living in those areas that you will have some sort of fire, whether the speed of this one or not, wind driven and whatnot, homes will be protected. Now, to weigh this out to the fire that occurred in Hawaii, there's a few success stories of homes, and one was just by complete luck that the home survived. And what I mean by that is these homeowners bought this home, they went through a remodel, they put a tin roof on their house instead of asphalt roof, because of a water leak type thing. They had some issues with water. They had to dig up around their house, so they had this defensible space around their house, which they didn't grow any. It just was just timing wise, nothing grew to it, and that house stood, right, and almost like Mexico City in Florida, where they had the last house standing, it stood due to the construction of a particular home, and I did an interview with Fortified, which is a standard of building, and they talked about, we talk about that one home in Mexico Beach, but no one talks about the Habitat for Humanity homes that Fortified helped build that were just a few blocks away from there, that didn't suffer damage due to proper use of materials, and as they say, one extra nail in the roof, oddly enough, makes a big difference. And so these building standards become important. And so Paradise embraced this and said, hey, we're going to help you build. We're going to go through the process. We're going to get grants, insurance. We're going to work through all this. But when we build, we need to build stronger, smarter, and better, right? And now, because of that, using those standards, that the city of Paradise has become a stronger city because of that. And using the 30, 60, 90-day principles is the 30-day principles is getting the area clean, ready to rebuild. And the 60-day part of it is getting homes approved to be built into that area using new higher standards of building materials. And is it more expensive? It's going to be a little bit more expensive, but can we absorb that expense and maybe even through government grants, right? Absorb that expense, because at the end of the day, it becomes cheaper. And so the new standard used to be $1 in prevention, saved $7 on recovery. I saw a paper the other day that stated it was like 1 to 15.
Really?
So there's looking at that, it's going, and there's a variable on it too, by the way, but so you can even be as high as like 1 to 15, $1 spent in prevention. And so I, as a taxpayer who, to be honest with you, I mean, like, I'm not like big into frivolous spending in government. But the idea here is that I, as a taxpayer, could get behind using taxpayer grants to help rebuild homes in this area that would be robust and anti-fragile, because I know at the end it's going to save us money, right? Yep. Now we could go into arguments of whether they should be building that area first or not, but that's besides the point, but we could just debate that later. But it is an area that's been historically lived in, and it's the WUI,
yes.
But anyway, it's a whole other story.
I guess we're talking about catastrophic loss here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we're talking about Paradise or recently the catastrophic fire in Lahaina, it's catastrophic for those communities in terms of the loss, not only, most importantly, of life, because up until the Lahaina fire, Paradise, California had one of the highest losses from a wildfire, at least in recent history. And now that's been surpassed, unfortunately. Also consequent loss of homes and other buildings and things of that sort. So, and I'm going to link to an article that I raised with you on the Los Angeles Times about 5 years on, and survivors of the Paradise Fire sort of looking back on sort of Maui and looking at the situation in Maui and sort of saying, okay, well, this is sort of what they can sort of face. So with that in mind, when we're talking about a cat incident and the amount of money that is put forward. So in that article, they talk about federal government aid and state block grants and the PG&E settlement that took years to litigate. Total of about $900 million total, probably not including insurance and other assistance and so forth. Roughly about $300,000 per resident. Now, there's other particulars, right? When we talk about community resilience, in Paradise, they don't have a sewer system. So they, operate off of, wells and septic tanks and things of that sort. But that process requires plan approvals, permitting, and things like that. So the town is around 9,000 residents right now, where it was 27,000 or so, I think, prior to the wildfire. So, and I think you mentioned New Orleans and the recovery of Katrina after Katrina and things like that. I guess when we're talking about recovery, are we talking about it specifically just in terms of raw numbers, or are there other factors that we need to take into consideration?
Oh, there's definitely other factors that we need to take into consideration. And, one of the things that I really teach, right, and I stress this to my students, is that if you are running a county or city, any, because everybody goes, water districts or municipal districts too. It's a little bit different, right? So if you're running a county or city or township, anything that you're dealing with population of people, and then land use type things, is you need to write a recovery plan today, right? And you need to look at this and how do you want to shape what your city looks like? Now, this can sound conspiratorial, to some people, right? They go, oh yeah, the big government wants to come in and take away my property and do different things with it. And it's not that, right? It's not rezoning. You're not trying to zone out living conditions or move factories into where homes used to be, or vice versa, and get rid of factories and move homes there. That's not the idea of having a recovery plan beforehand. The idea is have a plan to pre-approve, not pre-approve necessarily, it's the wrong word to use. Have a plan to have a process. So approval of building permits to meet that standard can be moved faster through the process to cut that red tape, right? So people understand what they need to have before they walk into the room, into the building when they're looking for permits. Understand the process of hiring, maybe temporary or contracting with building officials, so you can get building inspections done faster. Is there a process of saying, hey, we don't necessarily think it's a wise idea to build homes in this area? Where so for instance, say in the mangrove, say in South Carolina, which say you shouldn't really build there. We saw this happen on Long Island, New York, on Dune Road. They're just not too far from where I had a house. Well, my dad had a house, I should say. Kind of makes it sound like I have a lot of money floating around here. No, my dad had a house. They said, hey, you just can't build there. Well, you can rebuild there, but we're not going to bail you out. That's basically what they said. So they're saying, hey, this is your property. You can rebuild there, but now insurance, your insurance may not cover you. We're not going to cover you again. So you're on your own. So we're not saying no, but we're just saying, and then so that makes it on the person to economically recover themselves. And then the other side of it too is it makes it harder for them to resell. So I mean, but you have to be, it's hard. What's it called? They're tough love, right? When it comes to this. You can, but do buyout programs, which can be expensive. But the idea here is saying this is the area that's safe to, right? And there's examples of towns. There's a few examples. One I think can think of off the top of my head was in Illinois, where they moved the entire town out of the flood zone. They left the flood zone for farming and for parks, knowing that it was just going to be crops or fields that got flooded. Nobody was losing their home off of this. And then, so that's an example of doing trades, right? Trading properties, for town properties or city-owned property, for people. So you can do swap. There are various different methods that you can do. And it's not a one size fits all, right? It's what fits for your community. Now, on the other side of this is that recovery plan should not be done in a vacuum. Right? You shouldn't sit in an office and type away and say, here's our recovery plan, put it to the city council and get a vote for it. You really need to do some charrettes and have community members buy in on that, because if not, then you're going to be caught up in legal issues for a very long time. Right? And you say, this is what this community wants to be, and this is what we can be to become stronger, better, and after a disaster. And that makes people go, oh, maybe I should make defensible space around my home. Right? Mm-hmm. You could pass some of those rules that say if you don't have defensible space around your home, the city will come in and do it for you, but we're going to charge you. I live in the WUI myself, right? I understand the risks. I understand the fact that my insurance company that I had for many years said, we're no longer going to insure you. And I had to go find a different insurance company. Now we're insured, right? But I mean, but I don't have branches of my tree touching my house. I have a concrete tile roof. I don't have an asphalt roof. I have my vents that are using small mesh, so embers can't get through that to get into my attic space. I've hardened my home specifically, so I practice what I preach, right? Yep. And so I've hardened my home for wildland fires, and I know that I look out my back window here and I see this beautiful hillside that hasn't burned in 30 years and scares me, but I am on the downslope. So it's a little bit, it's not the upslope, which is a whole different story, but yeah, could we burn here? Absolutely. and we have plans and here at home, and I understand what the risks are, and I've done things to mitigate that risk using DRR for my own home that I think that we should be using for communities.
Yeah. That's a good point. And one thing I did want to point out, and that is I will include a link to the home that you referenced in Lahaina, the one that survived, because as you pointed out, it was like that house was a poster child of what you should do to mitigate the potential hazards from a wildfire. And some of it was clearly intentional, others just coincidence. They luckily that they had built at that time, so nothing around it really created any fuel for that house to burn.
And it was some flooding issues that they were trying to mitigate, not fire issues that they were trying to mitigate, which is the funny part.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So the article mentions, and I references that some residents decided not to return. Some of them due to unavailable social services, because they weren't available any longer, because some of the medical facilities,
The hospital
had not basically been rebuilt, or because of the psychological trauma or the sense of safety that they felt in returning. The reality is that some residents will retreat and relocate, as our colleague Kathleen Tierney has referenced in her book on sociology on disasters. Is migration away from the WUI a new reality? And when I say WUI, I mean wildland urban interface, for those who are not familiar with the term.
Yeah, sorry. That's the problem with our job. We talk in acronyms and weird words all the time, and people are like, "What are you saying? What language are you speaking?" It is English, sort of, but yeah. So is there migration? I don't think that pre-disaster migration is occurring, and I say this, I don't have evidence in front of me, right? I'm just going with anecdotal evidence. And you see this in California specifically. Traditionally, up in the San Bernardino Mountains, homes were relatively inexpensive. I guess technically they still are relatively inexpensive, but that's a whole. So I remember when I was first looking for a home when I got out of the Navy, and I had a whole $110,000 pre-approval on buying a home. I was like, woo, right? There's nothing, by the way. That's even back then, it was not a lot of money. And so we're looking at like condos, townhomes, stuff like that. That's probably the level of home I could have purchased at the time. And homes that were out of our reach were in like the $300,000 range. Today are multi-million-dollar homes. Just kind of put that perspective of the time of moving. So, friends of mine who were in the same boat as me, actually went and bought a house, beautiful house, up in the San Bernardino Mountains, gorgeous house, for that would have been like $400,000, down here in the Orange County, LA County basin, for like $80,000. And I really, for a strong moment, was thinking, man, is it worth the hour commute to live up in the mountains, and to come down to having that kind of a house for that little money? And yeah, I really thought about doing it. We didn't pull the trigger, when we ended up doing something else. But again, my wife was like, nope, not going to do it. I don't want to be up there in the wintertime. There's all these other issues associated with it, so yeah. So my point is today, those homes that were going for $80,000 are now $600,000-$700,000 homes, and people are buying them. Still moving up there. So I don't see I don't see people moving quickly away from that, and that's a place that burns a lot. Arrowhead, Big Bear, Crestline, Idlewild, Wilmar, all those places that we think about fires in California, they burn. And so I don't see people running away from the WUI. I do think it's interesting that you're seeing more and more restrictions on new construction in those areas, which I think is right. Although Los Angeles County approved a large property development in the Wu, in an area that's historically burns. I'm really interested, and there are going to be higher end homes, right? There's like $1 million homes that they're building over there. I find that kind of interesting. That got approved because what risk are they taking if that area burns, and what does that mean for insurance and for recovery? Going back to, if you're going to get $300,000, that's not going to rebuild your multi-million-dollar or $1 million+ home. So those are as a policy guy, I look at this and go, well, why was that decision made? And what is the long-term effects on that decision? But I don't see people retreating from the WUI pre-fire.
Right.
Post-fire, yeah, absolutely. People don't want to go back. Same like an earthquake, right? After an earthquake, you see the population in California take a small dip, but then it comes back up.
Well, and that brings up a question. I know this is not one that we necessarily had prepared for, but do you think that real estate agents, builders should be forthcoming? Really, when you go to buy a home, you have to divulge what any of the issues that have been in the house before. If you've had termites, those sorts of things, what kind of care that you keep of the home on a regular basis. There's a whole sheet that usually are given, and you have an inspection done and all that other good stuff, right? But when it comes to risks, flooding risk, fire risk, things like that, it's not necessarily something that is, for folks who are not aware or not familiar with a certain region that they may be buying into. There was an article I saw this weekend about that, or this past week, about that homeowners should be made aware. There should be a full disclosure of these sorts of risks, or that individuals should be mindful when they're going to buy a home. I know for my own self, so when we moved out of Brooklyn out to New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and we were looking at homes, and I remember seeing a place, and there was an outlet of I think it was the Rahway River that we're looking at. And I asked the question, I said, has that ever flooded? And they said, oh, it flooded a long time ago, and it's only about a foot of water. And I said to my wife, I said, well, that we're done with looking at this house because we can't move the house. I'm not going to put up preventive barriers. So,
right.
I was highly aware of the potential for flooding. So that was a strong consideration. So anyway, with that long-winded question, do you think that should be made, should be a disclosure about the risks of where people are buying homes?
I talked to a real estate friend of mine, and oddly enough, his house burnt down during a fire, and we can get into that here in a minute. But not burnt down all the way, which was actually more problematic than if it burned all the way to the ground. And I asked him that question. I said, should this be disclosed? And his, from the business standpoint, he's just like, well, people should do their own homework. I don't know if I should be going around telling people, because I always say that wrong word. He has a financial fiduciary responsibility. I was going to say pecuniary. That's the word I was looking for, but I think I'm enunciating that wrong. Anyway, he has a fiduciary responsibility to his clients to get the most money he could possibly get for them, right? So telling people, hey, if you buy this house, don't forget you're in the WUI, it might burn down, probably would turn them off for purchasing it. Now, does he have an ethical and moral responsibility for saying something? I would say absolutely. However, it's also like, you buying that home should do a little bit of homework and understanding what you're going into. So I think there's some onus on the home buyer. It shouldn't always be on the home seller. Now, that being said, I think that the county, when you are working with a real estate agent, the county or city, should say, hey, the last time this area burnt or flooded or whatever was this, and this is what the damage was done. There should be a place where you can get that information readily available, right? And I want to go to Houston for a minute. So NPR did a wonderful story, and I forget the name of the story, but it was on Houston after the floods, not, I mean, the hurricane, but created floods.
Mhm.
And they were talking about this community that was very new, very beautiful homes, rolling parks, all this kind of stuff. Well, you know where they built it? Well, they built it in this area, and on the map it said reservoir, right? And it was a dry reservoir, but it was a reservoir nonetheless. And so as Houston flooded, it naturally flowed into those reservoir areas. And so it was by design. And I know some of the homeowners were trying to sue. I don't know what the disposition of this case was, but they're trying to sue the county and all this other kind of stuff. But the county was like, "Oh yeah, it was on the map," right? And the reporter said, "Yeah, it was on the map, but you needed like a freaking magnifying glass to read it, right? I mean, small print, but it did say flood zone on the map."
Yep.
So, but was not an easy place for the homeowner or for the potential buyer to find that it was a flood zone, and by design. And I thought that was kind of immoral in a way, to hide that information. So I think should we force the seller to articulate that they live in the WUI? I mean, somebody who comes to my house and looks in the backyard should go, "Oh, well, that looks like a threat. What's the last time it burnt?" And okay, should I take that risk? Oh, 30 years ago was the last time it burnt. No homes burned down the last time it burnt. Okay. All right. So it's pretty safe to bet that your home isn't going to burn down. These homes have been here since 1965. I probably a bigger threat to earthquake than I have to the home burning down from the, so that's that risk that you have to balance that risk and reward, right? So do we make a mandate that you have to do it? It's hard to say, because if I said, "Oh yeah, 30 plus years ago, now it's 35 years ago, there was a fire back there, the house wasn't harmed," are you gonna buy it? Maybe. But I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. I'm it's one of those things you have to ponder for a little bit. Like what is the responsibility of the homeowner or the home buyer to take a look at those issues and to have a outside. Now I know if somebody dies in the home, that has to be told. I don't know necessarily why that has to be told, but I mean, I get it if somebody's murdered in the home, because it's a little kind of odd. But if somebody just dies in the home, why is that? So there's like things like that, some really kind of strange rules that we have here in California that I'm like, oh, I wonder why that's a rule, but it is. But do we, like, at what level is it just going? Why do we have to disclose all this? If it was a crime committed in the home, do you have to? If your home is robbed, do you have to disclose that? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud right now. But yep. I mean, like where do we stop that?
Sure.
But I do think that there should be an easy location from each jurisdiction, each city, that you can go in. What were the list of disasters that occurred from this date to this date? Was my address impacted by that disaster? I think that should be done by the city, because it's easy to database to maintain, and emergency management should be maintaining that anyway.
So do you have a few more minutes? I know you've got other things to get to, and if there's an item on your calendar that you got to attend to, I understand. I have one more. I at least have one more question. I may have a few after I ask this one. So there are still questions about the risk faced when evacuating from some of these communities, right? Clearly, Lahaina had its, the evacuation, let's say, from that area when the wildfire, descended on the town. People were not able to evacuate. The warning didn't happen soon enough. There were a lot of issues there. In Paradise, similar issue. I remember reading about the incident from its start through to how quickly it spread. I mean, it moved football fields in a matter of seconds. So now that they're looking at, making it more resilient, again, the article that the Los Angeles Times wrote on this indicated that additional roads have yet to be built. And I was really surprised that a lot of the roads are privately owned roads. So I think something like 50% of the roads are privately owned. And so the town's not responsible for maintaining it. They're responsible for maintaining those town-owned roads, reestablishing, repaving them, etc. In the near term, there are some additional risks, that are present there in rebuilding within Paradise. And how do we take into consideration, how do we address the evacuation needs for the population that's repopulating Paradise?
Well, I want to address Lahaina really quick, and the evacuation sirens. There's this debate going on whether they should have hit the sirens or not. And when I was with the city of Dana Point, we have we have sirens that were originally put together for the nuclear power plant. And so when the siren was gone off, it was associated with some sort of threat for the nuclear power plant. And now, mind you, it didn't mean evacuation. It just meant, hey, turn on your radio for more information. But everybody thought that was evacuation sirens. So even with that education piece, it was hard. So traditionally in Lahaina, the sirens were associated with tsunami threat. And they never drilled, even though it said on their website that it was for multiple threats, they never drilled fire, right? So the idea of the siren going off, people's reaction would be opposite to what they wanted. It would be to go inland and uphill. We did a concerted effort in Dana Point when we started doing tsunami stuff with the sirens, to do public education, that the siren meant to turn the radio on. And then we added a voice component to the siren. So the siren would go off, and then the voice would come across saying, this is the threat. Whether it was a nuclear threat, whether it was a tsunami threat, those are the two that we're worried about. I would say, this is a tsunami warning, please go to higher ground. Or, there's been an issue at the nuclear power plant, and these are the directions that we're going to give you. And so we had a voice component added to the sirens. I'm assuming, I haven't been for Dana Point for a long time. I'm assuming that's still the issue. This is still what is happening down there. So you have to ask them if that's the case, but that's what it was when I left in 2007. So if they have not drilled that siren to be more than just tsunami, that the decision to not blow that horn, I don't say it was the right decision. I'm sure people that are going to hear this are going to be upset with that. But it just, what I know, and I don't know enough. I'm just telling you what I know from what I've read. I have not spoken to anybody from Maui emergency management to understand what their training has been done, but that's it. The other side of it, though, is mass notification. And this is we could have a whole conversation about mass notification and the issues associated with it. What they said here is we didn't get mass notification because our cell towers burnt, which is an issue, huge issue. Their landlines, if they had them, didn't work because of the same problem. There's technology out there that is very, very, very inexpensive, and it's in your phone currently. Just have to have the right applications associated with it that allows for mesh networking, where when cell towers or power goes out, you can still communicate with each other. And so I can tell you that's a, it's the technology's there. Now the other side of it, and it sounds like you go, oh, don't be victim blaming. I don't know how many people. I can tell you the percentage in Orange County, California, is very low of those that participate in the Alert OC system. right? So that means that, and there's various different reasons why people don't want to download the app. Oh, I don't want to download the app because, it's the government spying on us. So I don't want to download the app because, I don't want to use my phone for this. I don't want to get notifications in the middle of the night or whatever their excuse for not wanting to download the app and utilize and be part of the system is. I remember when they did WIA exercises or drills or testing, I should say, that people complained about getting the wireless emergency alert notification on their phone, and I didn't authorize them to use my phone. I didn't pay for the blah blah blah. All these reasons why they shouldn't have received those text messages from the federal government regarding testing of the system. Some of it was political. They didn't like Trump, or they didn't like Obama, or they didn't like Biden or whoever else is particularly pushing that button at that time to put out the that alert. Oh, why is President X using his power to go to my phone? It's so there's all sorts of weird reasons why people don't want it. So is we the end all be all answer to the problems that we're having with mass notification? It's not, but it is a answer, and it is a solution, and it's one that should be used. But in the case of Paradise, the fire moved so fast that the town, and they were using a different system, and that they just implemented the system days or weeks prior to the fire occurring, so people weren't even necessarily registered, and so there was some issues with Paradise being able to send out mass notification. But the other thing too is what we tell people all the time, and if you see smoke or smell smoke in your area, don't wait for government to tell you to leave. Understand, goes back to personal responsibility. Understand where you live and what the threats are. And if you see this, and again, people are going to be like, Todd, you're victim blaming. I'm not victim blaming. I understand that there's issues, but I'm saying, like, we have to go, why do we rely upon the government to tell us what to do? Right? We are capable people. And you know what? And this goes into one more portion of this. I understand that people don't want to be the scaredy cat, the being made fun of because they see the smoke and whatnot, and they're like, I'm out of here, and ends up being a small fire, and they're like, you evacuated your house for no reason. Or in earthquakes, for instance, we talk about not being the first person to go underneath the desk for that small shaker that occurs, and Californians are like, that was only a 5.8. Why are you scared? Things like that. And there's a psychological aspect to it. Amanda Ripley writes about it really well in her book. Oh my gosh, just lost the name of the book.
We'll post it for our listeners.
Yeah, I got it right behind me. I can find it pretty quickly, I think.
It's all right. We can make it an interactive podcast.
Yeah. So those that know, I'm 53 years old and my brain is starting to get mush a little bit here. I can tell you what she wrote the book about, but anyway. So look up Amanda Ripley. She has great books. So it's about her disaster readiness book. The idea of people don't panic, they freeze, they don't make decisions. They're waiting for somebody of authority to make the decision for them. There's a lot of that going on, right? And I understand it. So I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying that we don't need to wait. And that's what they said if you watch the movie Paradise, it's on Netflix, by the way, highly recommend it. Actual dispatch conversation going on where people are calling and saying, hey, I think there's a fire, and the dispatcher at one point goes, there's a fire, if you see smoke, evacuate now. Mm-hmm. Now there's a risk to that, right? Now you have a bunch of people on the road that might not be impacted by the fire, that are in the way of people that are impacted. So there is a balancing act, right? And there's no perfect answer to this. We can only do the best that we can do. And so that's why preparedness portion of it. And when you start looking at anti-fragility, the majority of what we're looking at here isn't the response or the recovery side of it. It's that whole preparedness and readiness. And as Brock Long talks about the concept of creating a culture of preparedness, right? The 30, 60, 90-day plan creates that culture of preparedness. Disaster risk reduction emphasizes the culture of preparedness, right? We as emergency managers need to emphasize the culture of preparedness, and we use these disasters that have come before us to really stress to individuals and organizations to have preparedness as being part of their mindset, not just an afterthought.
Yep.
And I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. And you know, if you remember back, you know, this October we'll come across in most of the United States, we're going to be discussing, you know, the Mrs. O'Leary and her cow with the Great Chicago Fire, right? We're also discussing, you know, drop, cover, and hold on for earthquake awareness in October. So, you know, this is a great time, and, you know, get kids that are out there that are going trick-or-treating. You know, I'm going to challenge some people here for October, and this just popped into my head. What if, as emergency managers, we go into neighborhoods, right, and do pop-up stuff, right, and bring our cool truck or whatever and give out candy to kids, and attached to the candy is some sort of preparedness message for the family, right? Maybe some people throw it out. It's kind of a cool thing. Why don't we do that? Why don't we make Halloween another way of giving out, and, you know, so don't be a miser. Don't put like a little piece of hard candy. Do something good. Go spend some money and get some chocolate bars, and give chocolate bars out to kids with a preparedness message wrapped around it. You know,
I think there's a sponsorship waiting for Hershey.
Yeah, Hershey, if you're listening, love to have that sponsored. I'm sure you guys could do private labels for us. That'd be outstanding. It would be great if we could get somebody like that to do that. You know, there's a beer company in, I want to say, South Carolina, that created a hurricane beer, and it's and on the beer it's labeled for hurricanes, and it has a QR code on there, and it goes, if you click on the QR code, it goes to the county's emergency management page.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. One thing I wanted to point out, and I want to make that clear, I get your message about personal responsibility. We also need to take into consideration that there are certain segments of society that are more vulnerable, especially people with disabilities, the frail elderly, people who have limited English proficiency. So, and I know within the emergency management community, we are very much aware, and it is an intrinsic part of our planning posture and what we do, and you know, from the front end all the way through to, you know, the final stages of our planning, training, and exercises. But I want to make sure that that's clear to the listening audience that you know, when it comes to individual responsibility, that it's also the individual responsibility of the community that
Yes.
needs to prepare. So it's neighborhoods, neighbors helping neighbors when they need help, knowing
Absolutely.
help, and getting that message out to family members, friends, and things of that sort.
Let me address that for a second, and thank you for bringing it up. And I'll tell you two things on this. One is like, yes, this is not every person for themselves, and you just bail out of your community. Understand what your neighborhood is, right? And there's a program that we created when I was in Seal Beach called Neighbor for Neighbor. And the idea here is everybody in the neighborhood gets to know each other. It doesn't have to be just for disasters. This one neighborhood that we worked with found that there was an elderly shut-in woman living there, and the neighborhood got together and took turns making sure she was fed. When I say fed, that she, you know, like that they cooked for her. They took her to the doctor's appointments because she didn't have a car. She was waiting on like community van to come pick her up, but they said, no, we'll do it for you. And the neighborhood came together around this one particular elderly person, you know. So it's stuff like that is critical, you know, to keep your neighborhood together. You know, in my little cul-de-sac I live in, we all know each other up here. It's you know, go outside, knock on the door, make a friend, you know, walk the dog. You get to meet a lot of people. but you do things like that to understand who lives who, and even if you don't necessarily know them, okay, this is an elderly couple that lives here. If something occurs, we're going to check on them. So that's part of personal responsibility is understanding your neighborhood and who you're with, and I'm not asking you to be buddies with everybody in your neighborhood. At least be friendly with them, and I know I feel sorry for the people who live in neighborhoods where they don't get along with each other. I know that occurs. So that's not necessarily. The other thing too, as emergency managers, one of the things I realized early on in my career is that a lot of our plans are written specifically for people who have, right? People who have vehicles, people who have the means, people who aren't struggling or on the margins where the extra can of SpaghettiOs is not able to be purchased because they need to put every single cent they have in just to feeding their kids and keeping the roof over their head. Understand that you have those people in your community, and those are the people who, as emergency managers, we should be planning for and helping, right? Yeah. Yes. And so guys like me and Andrew who have good families and live in nice homes and have cars to be able to run out. You have people that don't have family around them, don't have a car, that rely upon public transportation. Those are the ones that are on the margins, whether they're going to be able to keep their apartment or their home. Those are the ones that we should be planning for. Those are what we should be using government resources for. And I do stress that. So I'm not. We speak in very broad brush terms here when we talk about that, but that's what we're here. That's really where the crutch of emergency management should be focusing on those that really need the help. The mobility challenged, right? How do we work with them? I grew up with an aunt who was severe arthritis, and she was in a wheelchair in most of her life. My nephew who lives in upstate New York, he's a firefighter actually. He's deaf. Sending those mass notification notices, don't help him. I'm still trying to find a alarm company that would want to work with mass notification companies to be able to do flashing lights inside the home when a mass notification goes out. I can't get those guys to call me back. So if anybody out there knows alarm company CEO, it would be great to have them think of, hey, it's a free giveaway. Take it, run with it. I don't need credit for it, but if we could do something like that to be able to help, because there's a community of deaf people in Northern California that almost died because when they're doing route alerting for a fire, no one heard them, and it's just they ended up one person saw it and went and started knocking on their doors. They would have just been sleeping. It was so we have to be thinking about those, and the other side of it too is in Orange County, California, when we were looking at access to functional needs issues, it wasn't able-bodied people who wrote that plan, right? What we did is worked with Dale McIntosh Center, and which is an area that was working with disabled people, had disabled people in wheelchairs, people with access to functional needs actually writing the plan, right? Because and good friend of mine, Vance, who is with the California State Office of Emergency Services. If you guys have probably seen him, he's and he's wonderful, great resource. If you ever want to reach out to him, he would awesome, very talented emergency manager, and he's doing great work in the Daphne space. And those with as Vance say it again, it's like don't plan about us without us.
That's right.
So I think that's critical as well. So yeah, I know. So like I said, we've done some sweeping generalizations here, but that's yes, we need to be taking that into consideration wholeheartedly.
Well, I think you've first of all covered a lot of ground, and given our listeners and my students who listen to my podcasts a lot to think about. And I want to thank you very much for your time and appreciate inaugurating my re-inaugurating the Riding the Wave podcast on project management for emergency managers. We didn't even get to talk about project management, so that'll be our next topic.
Absolutely. And first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to be on this, and it's a pleasure to be the guy kicking off your reboot of the podcast. I also want to say congratulations on your book and on the classes that you are creating, and I'm looking forward to the kickoff of your workshops in November here in California when you come to the conference. And so I'm just so excited for you for both.
All right, great. And thank you for mentioning that. I almost forgot about that. So for those who are listening, this is, I guess, my shameless plug is that I'll be delivering a workshop on project management for emergency managers, a 2-day condensed workshop out in Long Beach, California on Friday, November 3rd, correct?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
November 4th. I know I'm going to get I'll forget the dates wrong. The days and but you'll see it. It'll be posted. So it'll be delivered around the time of the National IAEM conference, and I'm looking forward to that. So watch out for that link and for registering it if you're going to be around at that time.
Yeah.
And so we spoke with Todd DeVoe, who is the host of the Emergency Management Network podcast. He's also an adjunct professor of emergency management at the University of California, Irvine, and a national speaker on the topics of emergency management, business continuity, and crisis response. Thanks again for coming on the podcast, Todd.
My pleasure, Andrew.
You've been listening to Riding the Wave, hosted by Andrew Boyarsky, president of Pinnacle Performance Management and clinical associate professor in emergency and project management at NYU and John Jay College.